I'm going to disclose for this presentation. Before we jump into the presentation, I want to give you some background on myself and some context for why I'm here and giving this presentation. So, my name is Stan Collins. I'm part of Each Mind Matters. I'm a suicide prevention specialist with Each Mind Matters. Specifically, I work on the Know the Science campaign. So, in California, we have the California Mental Health Services Act. Cal Mesa is the Mental Health Services Authority, and counties, behavioral health agencies pull their money together. And through that, I work on Each Mind Matters, but specifically on the science team, which is I would describe it as the suicide prevention branch. So what we do is we provide technical assistance to county behavioral health agencies, organizations throughout California. My background is that I've worked in suicide prevention for about 20 years now. We don't have time today for me to tell you the full story about it, but I lost a friend to suicide when I was a freshman in high school. And this was back in the mid-90s. This was at a time when we simply didn't talk about suicide. My senior year in high school, I got involved with the Young Women's Suicide Prevention Organization. And from there, I've been working. About 6 years ago, I started working as a consultant, so I work with the statewide campaigns. I also, actually, I'm going to pass these out. Has anybody ever heard of the Directing Change program in phone context? Okay, I'll pass these out and I'll tell you about them. The Directing Change program is a youth mental health and suicide prevention program, but instead of going into a classroom and just talking at kids, we engage them by inviting them to create 60-second films about mental health and suicide prevention. And so all the learning objectives that we want them to have occur through the filmmaking process. So you can go to directingchange.org and get some more materials up front. I also have some DVDs out on the table that have the films. They're really amazing films. And I'll see actually. If we have time, I might even pull up a film and show it for you. But so anyways, I was one of the authors of the toolkit that I passed out to you. I also spent 5 years as an emergency medical technician at San Diego Fire Rescue. So I have the medical perspective. So all those things combined are the reason why I'm in front of you today. So with that, I try to run pretty casual presentations. I don't want to just be talking the whole time, so questions, conversations, there's a lot of experience and expertise in the room. Yes, sir.
I work with the Medina State Mental Hospital. In our data, there were 65% pre-suicidal patients. So that I need to know the symptoms or the...
Wait, sorry, say that again, 65%?
65% of the patients are suicidal. So that means there's a need that we can intervene before it happens.
Any others? Or any specific questions you're hoping that will? Yeah.
So I actually have a nurse. I had a coworker who actually committed suicide. And I have a daughter who is postpartum depression. And I've seen my nurse for 30 plus years, and I have seen many people go through phases of depression. But we live it. We're living it. There's definitely a need to recognize the symptoms and know the tools to use to help them get through the help finally.
Suicide prevention program that's focused specifically on supporting LGBTQ youth and young adults. They have crisis resources, crisis chats online, a few programs in elementary schools, a lifeline workshop. So, yeah, you said everything. I'm just going to go ahead and give kind of my quick theory around suicide. We're going to cover some of the warning signs. We're going to cover some of the risk factors. But what we've said is exactly it. There's something in your gut feeling. What I tell people when I come in to do a training is, like tomorrow I'm doing QPR, which is a 1-hour gatekeeper training. I'm going to be training people to go out into the community. And what I'm going to try to emphasize with them, and when I go out and I do these 1-hour trainings, is you can spend 5 minutes on a website and learn warning signs and risk factors. I'm not here to educate you. I'm here to make you more comfortable, because if we have the comfort with the subject, we're not going to trust our instincts. We've been for so long worried about doing the wrong thing that we don't do anything, or saying the wrong thing. And what I'm really trying to do, and I hope you walk away with today and through all my trainings, is to get people just to jump in and to realize that you are more qualified to do this than you think you are. And there is no wrong thing to say. I mean, there's a few things that are obviously wrong to say, but other than that, just get in there, create, like you said, that word, create that space. And that's when we look at the group that is disproportionately affected by suicide, it's middle-aged men, specifically even more so middle-aged white men. And one of the biggest disservices we've done to that group, and we do to young men and young women. We don't teach them how to create that space, and we have that space. And I'm sure in your experience, and for those of you who have counseled people who have thoughts of suicide, it's just allowing them to, it's asking somebody, are you thinking about suicide? It's almost like it immediately relieves the pressure. That it immediately makes them less at risk for suicide. But for so long we were worried that would make them more at risk for suicide. And there's a few theories out there. Thomas Joyner and Schneiderman all have these great theories about suicide. But for me, I simplified it down to two things. And in my experience, the majority of suicides that I've been exposed to, suicide attempts, people who are thinking about suicide, comes down to pain and hope. And suicide thoughts, attempts, and deaths happen when pain outweighs hope. And in that moment, when you think about connectedness to other individuals, who has better access to our pain and our hope than the people in our lives? And so, for a long time, we had this process of suicide prevention was a safety net. We caught people in the last minute, we passed them to somebody, we passed them to somebody, we passed them to somebody, and then eventually there was going to be this magic leprechaun that could cure suicide. And we forgot to acknowledge that not only does that leprechaun not exist, but each of the links in that chain is an opportunity to turn the dials on pain and hope a little bit. And so that's one of the key principles of this presentation is really involving everyone. Sorry, there's a few other, we'll move on, there's something else jump in. But, so with that, this presentation is based on the Witchy Toolkit that was created in partnership with the Western Interstate Commission on Higher Education Suicide Prevention Resource Center. If you're not familiar with the Suicide Prevention Resource Center, sprc.org, it is a national kind of database organization that provides technical assistance across the country. So they are the go-to place for information. You go to the websites. They don't longer have the official list of best practice registry, but just that's where a lot of the best information is going out. And then also it's adapted from a program we did down in San Diego that I was part of, where I went out and I trained a variety of primary care settings on suicide prevention. So what we're going to cover in the next hour or so is we're going to look at key principles in the approach, why focus on suicide in primary care settings, just a little bit of epidemiology. And the only reason I'm going to focus on epidemiology or data around suicide is to highlight a few of the risk factors. One of the other things that I'm very passionate about is how we message around suicide. And for a long time, we were putting out a lot of the wrong messages around suicide. We were saying this group is so much at risk, and this group is likely to die. And we were flooding people with data about how big of a problem suicide is. And 20 years ago, when I first started, that's what we needed to do because nobody was listening. We needed to yell and say, hey everybody, there's a fire over here, because nobody was acknowledging, because nobody was talking about suicide. We did a survey through Other Science, throughout California, a phone survey. Most people now agree there's been enough to Robin Williams, Anthony Bourdain, Kate Spade, Junior Seau, all these prominent 13 Reasons Why, a lot of some. People no longer need to be convinced that suicide is an issue. They've been impacted. What they need to do, instead of spending time convincing people it's an issue, we need to spend time convincing people or telling them what to do and how they can respond in the important role that they can be. We'll briefly talk about warning signs and risk factors, but as noted earlier, there's some cookie cutters, but they do vary by every group. One of the things to acknowledge, especially with middle-aged men, that groups that's disproportionately affected by suicide, oftentimes they won't show the behavioral warning signs. In the medical setting, they might show more of the somatic symptoms that are associated with chronic pains, lower energy, or we don't see any warning signs, but we know the risk factors are present. We know that they had financial issues, job issues, relational issues. That should be enough for us to say, okay, they're not showing any warning signs of depression, withdrawal, isolation, but they are showing plenty of the risk factors. We're going to talk briefly about risk assessment and safety planning. Again, we're going to go into greater detail on those in the next session, possibly 2 sessions, and then we'll talk about some of the resources available. So, comprehensive suicide prevention. One of the big mistakes that I think, not just healthcare agencies, but a lot of agencies make, is that they think that suicide prevention is, okay, we're going to send some people to a training, we're going to do a risk assessment, and we're good. And they don't really realize that it doesn't matter what risk assessment you're using if you don't have policies and protocols to respond to that risk assessment. If you're doing PHQ 9, but you don't have enough staff to review every single one of them and thoroughly take time, it's one thing to hand somebody a clipboard and look at it and say, okay, no flags, but to have a clinical conversation with individuals. Involving everybody. Again, whether it's in a primary care setting, a podiatry office, even in a hospital setting, involving everyone, because I believe that nurses are the chosen people. You get more time with your patients than the physicians ever will. It's just most of the time the truth of the matter. But that doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of other people who can be those individuals. Let's say a typical primary care setting, the front office setting. They may be more familiar with cancellations or financial issues that that person's having. This person, well, that's strange. This person has canceled their appointment 3 different times over the past week and I can't get hold of them. That's information that on the surface may not mean something, but that combined with the history of depression and some other issues, they may also have a better relationship. They may have more time talking to that individual while they're sitting in the waiting room. So it's important that I include everyone, because if the doctor sees a couple and the nurse sees a couple and the front office staff sees a couple warning signs, but they're not communicating, those in and of themselves might not be enough to prompt an assessment, but you share that information. Asking the right questions. One of the big things I do in healthcare and law enforcement is really getting people to ask the right questions. We're going to talk later. It's not about asking somebody, are you thinking about hurting yourself? It's about either, are you thinking about suicide? And then, again, what is that referral process? So just a few quick kind of reasons to focus on suicide prevention primary care. Obviously, the Affordable Care Act is bringing things together from both sides, the physical and the behavioral. Especially in rural areas, primary care is where most people go for all of their health needs, mental health, physical health. That's where we're likely to see there's a lot less stigma going on. One of the things that is really an issue is that 70 to 80% of antidepressants are prescribed in a primary care setting, which in and of itself isn't a bad thing, but oftentimes that comes without a referral to behavioral health. There's a prescription that's given without, hey, you should also see a therapist. And a lot of people don't realize that the process should be, hey, why don't we see a therapist? Let's start there. If that's not sufficient, then let's start looking at antidepressants. And, there's been a lot of conversation over the past decade or so about antidepressants causing suicidality. And there's a lot of different opinions. My opinion can kind of be summed up as that when we give a person who's depressed antidepressants alone, we're basically giving somebody who maybe has been having thoughts of suicide a bunch of red pill. Now they're able to act on these thoughts that they've been having. We're not dealing with the actual thoughts, the reasons, the pain driving those thoughts of suicide. And there's obviously been a lot of health organizations and leading entities coming to the table and saying we need to be implementing suicide prevention policies. You may be surprised to find out that approximately 45% of people who die by suicide were seen by the primary care provider within 1 month of their death. As you move into the older age groups, it's an even shorter amount of time. It's multiple times within that amount. Many warning signs, we kind of touched on this earlier, but a lot of warning signs that aren't necessarily always associated with suicidality are seen in the primary care setting or the medical setting. Pain, sleep disturbances, anxiety. Just a quick anecdote, I went to a doctor for a year. I went in and I just kept having this pain in my neck, and I thought I was convinced I was dying of a tumor. And I went to my doctor and I was like, I have a tumor, and let's do a test. He's like, well, no, everything's fine. And I came back a couple months and I'm still having this pain in my neck. And he sent me to a specialist. And they did this whole test. They didn't find anything. And I was like, I don't trust him. Send me to another doctor. So I went to another doctor. And then finally, after 6 months of this back and forth, he sits me down and he says, so have you been stressed out? And I'm like, yeah, I've been stressed out. I went through this, I went through that. And all these things. And it's like, that should have been the very first part of the conversation. We get so focused on the physical, we forget to take a step back. And then obviously through the healthcare field, there's just a lot of trust that comes with that. So, popular risks that you're going to hear spoken to a lot. I already mentioned this. Middle-aged males are disproportionately affected by suicide. I come from San Diego. Down in San Diego, 64% of our suicides are comprised of middle-aged males. And people say, well, there's just a lot of middle-aged males in San Diego. In reality, they only make up 19% of the population, and yet they signify 64% of the suicides. That is absolutely disproportionate to the amount of individuals. So this is a group, especially white males, that is disproportionately affected by suicide. I do a lot in suicide prevention for youth. I work with schools a lot, the Break and Change program, and there is more funding and more attention being paid to youth suicide, and yet youth are the group that die the least by suicide. What's interesting about that is people forget that just because you die the least by suicide, they are actually one of the groups that's greatly impacted by suicidality. So suicide attempts, suicide thoughts. About 20% of youth will report that they considered suicide in the previous year, and about 10% report that they've actually attempted. Now, this is nationally that American Indians and Alaska Natives are one of the highest risk populations. Here in California, though, there was a study that came out a few years ago that said here in California, we actually see lower rates in our native populations. But one thing just to acknowledge, data around native populations is always going to be up. There's always going to be just a lack of tracking this. There's 100 different issues we have about data and around data. With LGBTQ, we see that about 50% of living transgender individuals report that they have either considered or attempted suicide in their lifetime. Another data issue is that we don't track LGBTQ status on a death certificate. Please jump in, I know this is your field, but so tell me if I do anything wrong. But with transgender individuals, we don't have data on actual transgender deaths. We just don't. We don't have any data. With LGBTQ, again, we don't track it on a death certificate. So we have some data, but we don't have great data. One of the issues, and this is not to call you guys out, but going back to a messaging perspective, for a long time we talked about LGBTQ youth being 3 to 4 times more likely to attempt suicide, which was great to get awareness and funding, but we have to be careful who our audience is. We don't want to walk into a group of youth and say LGBTQ youth are 3 to 4 times more likely. You're inadvertently normalizing suicide. You're saying, oh, there's something wrong with this group of individuals. And there's a great toolkit out there called Talking About Suicide in LGBTQ Populations. The big point that it emphasizes throughout, it's not being LGBTQ that increases suicide risk. It is the discrimination and harassment that can come with being LGBTQ. It's not a defective part of being LGBTQ that causes suicide. It's the discrimination and harassment. But someone who is LGBTQ, who is in a completely supportive environment, is at no increased risk automatically for suicide.
I would probably add acceptance in there as well.
Acceptance, yeah, supportive and acceptance. And inner acceptance and outer acceptance. And then military veterans, we hear the statement 22 veterans a day die by suicide. One thing that's interesting though, is that when you think about veterans and you relate it back to middle-aged older adults, suicide increases through the lifespan for males, veteran status increases through the lifespan for males. So is it that they're veterans that they're dying by suicide, or is it that they're middle-aged males that they're dying by suicide? And I think we've kind of blurred the lines with that. So just something to think about. These are some of the groups, but a lot of other groups get missed. Young Latina females are the highest group that make suicide attempts in our state. So that's a very high risk group for suicide attempts, not necessarily deaths. There's a lot of other groups. You just want to look at your population. This slide is going to be overwhelming, and I've kind of highlighted it, but right here is where we see the highest numbers of suicide from 45 to 65. We see the highest rates as we get into the older adult population per 100,000. One thing that's interesting, for every youth who dies by suicide, there's 100 to 200 youth who are estimated to attempt. For every adult who dies by suicide, it's estimated that there's 25 individuals who made an attempt. As we get into the older populations, for every older adult who dies by suicide, there's estimated that there's only 400 attempts that are made. And the point that I would take away from that is that lethality increases through the lifespan. So that's something we want to be very cognizant of, especially in older adults, because depression is not a normal part of aging, and suicide attempt is more likely to be lethal as we get into older ages. So I'm going to skip this, just I don't need to mention suicide issue. This is important. So this is a pyramid breaking down suicide behavior. So much of our work is focused up here, this top incredible 20,000 people who died by suicide. And as I was speaking to earlier, we forget that those numbers then represent this, over 1 million people, 1.5 million people made a suicide attempt. And that almost 3 million people made a plan. And then almost 10 million people have thought about suicide. And this is where the rubber meets the road. This is where the issue is. We will never have enough mental health professionals we just will never have enough people that are going to be able to respond to this level of need in our communities. So what we need to do is we need to bring in others. We need to bring in healthcare professionals. We need to bring in law enforcement. We need to bring in school counselors to help make sure that as we're sifting through this triangle, we're getting the people who are at the most risk, these people who made a plan and have a history of attempts, getting them into the most acute style of care. But we have to be looking at the larger issue of pain and attempts and ideation. But when it comes to means and methods, firearms are the predominant form of suicide. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, what was on the top of the pyramid?
41,425, is that?
For what's underneath it?
For deaths.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, for suicide deaths. All right, so means and methods. Firearms are the predominant form of suicide. In San Diego County and across the state, we're actually rolling out a program called the Gunshot Project. What we're trying to do is raise awareness of suicide prevention and firearm in the community at gun shops and gun ranges. And a lot of people, just to speak to means restriction, a lot of mental health professionals, a lot of healthcare professionals, primary care doctors, don't feel comfortable having a conversation about means restriction. They probably never have trained on it. B, they feel like it's out of line. And a lot of people simply still are stuck thinking that, well, if I take away the gun, they're going to get the pills. And if I take away the pills, they're going to do this. And if they put a barrier on the drugs, they're going to do this. But there's been a lot of research to show that restricting access to lethal means is the single most effective strategy for suicide prevention. I've worked a lot around this. And again, the idea being, well, they don't do this, they're going to do that. But there's been a number of studies that have shown that if you reduce access to one means of suicide, then suicides will go down overall. For example, there was a prescription that was used in Great Britain, and it was the highest incidence of suicide using that medication. So what they did is they changed the prescription, they changed the packaging. So rather than being a bottle of pills, it came in a blister pack, aluminum foil packs. Sounds very oversimplified, but how many actions does it take to attempt suicide using pills in a bottle? You unscrew the cap, pour them in your hand, you swallow. 3 actions. How many actions does it take to attempt suicide using 100 pills in a blister pack? 100 individual actions. Now, that's not necessarily a physical barrier or a time barrier, but that goes from me now making 3 conscious steps towards a suicide to now me having to take 100 conscious steps towards a suicide. And each one of those is an opportunity for my instinct for self-preservation to kick in. Or on the more tangible side of things, a friend of mine, her mother recently attempted suicide, and because they were in the blister pack, she had passed out by the time she got to pill 7, so she was never able to take a lethal dose. If she had planned ahead of time and popped them out, then yeah, she could have swallowed all at once. So that was one part of it. The other part of it is they changed the prescription. They reduced it, say, from 3 months down to 3 weeks. And so they were being seen by a medical professional, a pharmacist, every 3 weeks. And we forget that pharmacists are medical professionals. We do a training down at UC San Diego that trains every person graduating with a doctorate of pharmacy in suicide prevention, because they are giving means and methods across the county. But that gives them another opportunity for intervention. It also lowers the amount of pills that they have. So anyways, all this to say that they assumed that suicides using that medication were going to go down. More importantly, suicides overall went down. So they didn't even switch medications. They saw their number of suicides go down overall. Same thing happened in China and India. When they reduced the level of toxicity of the gas in the homes, suicides using that mechanism went down, suicides overall went down. Regarding firearms, people will say, well, what's the good of a gun lock and keeping the gun unloaded if I'm the one with the ammo and I'm the one with the key? Well, now you can't just pick up a gun and pull the trigger. Now you have to get the key, now you have to unlock the lock, now you have to get the ammo, now you have to load the gun. And again, every speed bump that we can put between somebody's thoughts of suicide and them making an attempt, they're less likely to progress through that. A colleague of mine, who I have a ton of respect for, was working with a military member who simply would not let the gun be taken out of the home. And so she got creative, and she said, well, what stopped you last time? Last time you got the gun, you were able to stop you. And he said, I thought about continuing stopping. She said, this is what I want you to do as soon as you get home. I want you to take your favorite picture of your daughter, and I want you to put it on top of that gun. If you ever go to reach for that gun, you're physically going to have to move your daughter out of the way. And he said just that moment of hesitation saved his life at least 10 times. So, suicide prevention, although we have research, we have best practices, sometimes we just have to get our hands in the mud and figure out what is going to work for this individual, what is going to cause them enough pause. But we need to be talking to people. This is going to relate later when we talk about suicide planning, because a lot of people don't realize that if we're not having a conversation about a plan, then we can't figure out what it means. And this is kind of a weird place to go in your head, and I apologize if it bothers anybody. But I'm willing to bet that each of us, if we were to choose, if someone said you have to choose how to die by suicide, we would say, well, I'm going to do one of these 3 things, but I would never do A, B, and C. And that list is going to be different for every single person. And by talking to somebody about their plans for suicide and what they are thinking about doing, we can't possibly, unless we put somebody in a box, even when we put them in said box, they still find ways to die by suicide, eliminate all means to harm oneself. But we can't talk to people and try to narrow that lane a little bit and try to specifically remove access to those means. All right, any questions so far? All right, I'm going to move through this part very quickly just because I think warning signs, risk factors, and protective factors are going to be reviewed for many of you. But just again, to reiterate, warning signs are specific behavior or emotional clues. Risk factors or conditions or circumstances that may elevate a person's risk. And protective factors or conditions or circumstances that can reduce risk. And this is an important part, because you can have two people with same warning signs, same risk factors, and yet one person attempts suicide and one person doesn't. And it comes back to protective factors of this. And I apologize, I have this kind of demonstration that I usually do in my presentations, but are you all familiar with the game Jenga? Okay, it's a bunch of blocks that you stack up, and then the person who pulls the last block out that causes the tower to fall loses the game, right? So if we use this as a metaphor for suicide risk, imagine that each of those blocks getting pulled out creates a risk factor for that individual. And what we often refer to as the cause of suicide is the last block that gets pulled out. It's the breakup, it's the job loss, it's the this, it's the that. And we want to put all the blame on that. And if all the other blocks had still been in place and that foundation had been stronger, that one block probably would not have had that big of impact. And so we have to be very careful. Risk factors increase risk. They're correlated to suicide. They don't cause, no one thing causes suicide. Being a veteran doesn't cause suicide. There's plenty of veterans who don't think about suicide. Being bullied doesn't cause suicide. Plenty of kids who get bullied that don't think about suicide. Mental illness does not cause suicide. Less than 5% of people with a diagnosed mental illness will ever attempt suicide. So although a lot of people obviously have mental health issues, it's not necessarily mental illness. All right, so key warning signs, obviously, if someone is looking for ways to harm themselves, if someone is talking about wanting to hurt themselves or kill themselves, if someone is talking or writing about suicide, especially if they're out of the ordinary for individuals, what we're really looking for is a sense of hopelessness. I talked earlier about, suicides happen when 8 hours hope. We can go through tremendous amounts of pain as humans, but as long as we have hope that things are going to improve, we can continue to make it through a lot. Now, going back to the fact that middle-aged men are disproportionately affected by suicide, I think part of the additional reason why that's true is that we miss these two warning signs. We think of someone who's suicidal as walking around like a hero with a rain cloud over their head. And when we see somebody who's sad, depressed, our instincts are to reach out and pull that person closer. When we see somebody who's acting angry, reckless, making risky behaviors, our instincts are to keep them at arm's distance. And a lot of times we don't realize that this is the same cry for help. This is oftentimes men not knowing how to deal with pain, and instead of knowing how to express that pain, it turns into anger and aggression. So that is one of the things we also have to look for. And the most important thing about warning signs is looking for changes in behavior. The most important question is asking why. What is the why of this behavior? What is the why of this withdrawal? What is the why of this anger? What is the why of the increased use of drugs or alcohol? And if we don't know the why, then we need to figure out what the why is. But I think this sense of feeling trapped is tied closely to the sense of hopelessness. Obviously, there are other traditional ones: withdrawing, isolation, the dramatic mood changes, seeing no reason for living. But again, these might be those things, those somatic symptoms that we see. A lot of times people will come into medical providers about anxiety issues, sleep disturbances, dietary issues, and it might all be related back to mental health issues, but you have such a short amount of time with that patient, your main focus is to figure out the physical issues. We forget that a lot of times it's mental health driving those physical issues. I'm going to see if it's on here. I think it is. One of the warning signs that's not listed here, and I apologize, and it's probably the most difficult warning sign for us to pay attention to, is a sudden increase in mood. A lot of times, so the spectrum of suicidality is approximately this. Someone is in a lot of pain, they start at some point to think about not wanting to be alive, and eventually that transforms into actual thoughts of suicide, and eventually, oftentimes, that will lead to a plan. And when someone makes a plan for suicide, what we often see is a sudden increase in mood. And the way that I would conceptualize this is that imagine tomorrow at noon you're flying an hour. So for the next 24 hours, you're going to be looking at your watch, 23 hours, 22 hours, 20 hours. You're going to let your inbox pile up, your to-do list pile up, because you're going to say, screw it, 23 hours, I'm out of here. In a similar way, someone when they make a suicide plan, they feel a sense of relief. They see an end to their pain. They now have hope that their pain will go away, unfortunately through a circumstance that we don't want. And so oftentimes when you talk to loss survivors, you'll hear them say, it's so strange, they've been depressed for months, and just last weekend they came and they had dinner, they thanked me for always being there, they returned some of the tools they brought, we had the best conversation, talking about memories. And then you talk to other family members and friends and say, oh, they stopped by my house too, they stopped by my house too. And our instincts, again, is counterintuitive, because when we see somebody who's been depressed all of a sudden do better, we want to embrace it, right? We don't want to do anything to mess with that chain of events. But in reality, we got to sit back and think, wait, people don't just snap out of depression. People don't just snap out of suicide risk. Why all of a sudden is this person doing better? So those warning signs are, especially if they're in relation to some risk factors, that's when we want to be especially concerned. But again, sometimes, especially with high-risk groups like middle-aged men, we're not even going to see the warning signs. We're only going to see the risk factors. Previous suicide attempt. Not that someone who makes an attempt, as we talked about, is forever broken, but crossing that line does allow us to get back to that place more easily. It doesn't mean we'll always stay in that place, but it can allow us to get back to that place more easily. And I'll put it to you this way. Has anybody here ever been skydiving? You have. How many times? 3 times. You are very well. Were you scared the first time?
Yeah.
Were you as scared the second time?
Yeah.
Were you as scared the third time?
No.
You're sure about that. Yeah, okay, so the third time you got to. So, third time you were less scared. Why were you less scared the third time? Because you knew what to expect, right? You knew what was going to happen. You were not against that instinct for, sorry, I'm using you to fill my metaphor, but you know what to expect. And if you compare that kind of mentality to a suicide attempt, is that once someone has crossed that line, suicide, many people think about suicide. I'm sure I'm not the only person in this room who's ever thought about not wanting to be alive. But most people have those thoughts for weeks, for months, the years kick back in, they move on, without ever thinking about a suicide attempt. Some people will get right up to the edge of the suicide attempt, as we heard, and they will stop for a variety of reasons. But a lot of times people stop simply from fear of the act. Attempting suicide is an incredibly scary thing. We have an instinct for self-preservation, and so it goes against that instinct. And when someone has broken through that, it shows a capacity for suicide. There's a lot in the suicide theory models that talks about it's hope, it's pain, or hopelessness, it's pain, it's feeling trapped, but it's also capacity. That's why we do see higher rates in medical professions, in law enforcement, in military, where people have more familiarity with means and methods for death and suicide, we see higher rates. And so, anyways, all that to say that 90% of people who attempt suicide will not go on to die of suicide, which is good news. That still means that 10% will. So we do want to stay vigilant with that group. We want to have a conversation. If someone is showing signs of suicide, and we know they've had a suicide attempt, we know that they can move more quickly through the stages towards another attempt. Now, a lot of people ask me about, what about self-harm? How does self-harm relate to suicide risk? And when I first started in the field, they said, absolutely self-harm is an indicator of suicidality. And then we started to figure out, no, it's actually more of a coping mechanism. It's somebody who's trying to live. And I would actually say that the answer lies somewhere in between. Because if someone is needing self-harm to cope, there's obviously a lack of coping skills in that individual. There's obviously a lack of wellness because that person is having to deal with stresses that overweigh their capacity to deal with it in a healthy way. And a couple other notes. Even if someone has never had thoughts of suicide, but they've self-harmed, if they ever do have thoughts of suicide, it will move very quickly, 0 to 60, through that because they know they don't have a fear of harming themselves. They've already eroded that fear over time. And so they can move very rapidly towards a suicide attempt. Another thing is that if somebody self-harms, a lot of times we will look at it and we'll say, oh, they've stopped self-harming, that's a good thing. What we actually have found out is that that can actually be a sign that their suicide risk is greatest, because that means that their strongest coping skills no longer being affected, and so they've given up on it. And so they now are going to be kind of up the creek without a paddle that they depended on or so. Risk factors, mental health issues, mental disorders, especially depression. Obviously, depression is a big part of it. There was a CDC report that's being debated right now that came out that said approximately 50% of people who die by suicide have a diagnosable mental illness. For the longest time, we said 90% of people have a diagnosable mental health issue. Obviously, there's a lack of mental wellness in anybody who doesn't want to be alive, unless it's from a different side, which I don't consider suicide, from a chronic pain, a terminal illness type. Substance abuse disorders, physical illness, especially with chronic pain. Chronic pain is highly correlated, highly associated, and then obviously easy access to legal means, as we talked about earlier. Sometimes my computer says. Now, the truth is, we could go through 1,000 more risk factors, right? I don't need to tell you one can increase risk. And the truth is, you stack enough stuff on any of us, we're going to run out of capacity to deal with it. These are some of the major ones, especially those that apply more to healthcare. Breakups, job loss, financial issues, death in the family, especially by suicide. That's something we miss a lot. We don't realize that there's been studies out there, and they estimate that people who are exposed to suicide are about 10 times more likely to attempt suicide in the 6 months following that death. And again, that all depends on how they deal with it. If they get into support groups, they get into a therapist who specializes in suicide bereavement, not necessarily an increased risk. My friend Jesse, who died when I was in high school, I know this to be true because just a few months ago his brother died by suicide because his family never addressed it. They never talked about it. They never spoke about it. They swept it under the rug and they hid it in the closet where it became a combustible situation. So just some other things to be thinking about. All right, so let's just read this. Just a quick case study. So Mr. John Jones. So Mr. John Jones is a 74-year-old African-American man, high blood pressure, successfully treated for prostate cancer 10 years ago. Currently being treated for severe chronic back pain associated with degenerative changes in the lumbar spine. He takes medication daily for blood pressure, pain, cholesterol, arthritis. He was recently widowed. He says that he has little hope that his back pain will improve. What are some of the things that jump out at you regarding Mr. Jones?
Little hope.
Little hope. And I would actually say that's probably the most important part.
Chronic pain.
Chronic pain for a lot of issues. What else? Recently widowed, so that's a huge risk factor, absolutely.
Age.
Age, yeah, he's right in that age group.
Medical condition, all the medical conditions.
All medical conditions. Now, is he at decreased risk because he's African American? No, and that's something that I hear people say a lot. Well, being black is a risk factor for suicide. Just because black males are disproportionately affected by suicide does not mean that black males, Asian males, Latino males cannot be at risk for suicide. So it obviously does have an impact, and it does reduce some of the outcome of suicide. Anything else that concerns you about the situation?
Cancer?
No? No? It's kind of a little, it's like where's Walter? Yeah. This guy has everything he needs to die by suicide.
Yeah, he's got
He's got all the needs of that. Who's in charge? He's widowed, so he has nobody probably overseeing his medication. He's alone with probably 10 different bottles of pills in his house right now. Now he's a male, he's probably more likely to die by a firearm, but that is something that we want to be bringing in. We want to look at. Yeah, we want to, we don't want to put restrictions on the person getting their medications, but what can we do? Maybe we can bring a family member that can drop the store the medications at their house, bring it by once a week. Hey dad, here's your pills, here's what's going on, or can we get some other help involved? Just reach out to this individual. Now, the truth of the situation is, in the medical community, we're so worried about just keeping him alive and moving that it's so easy to get distracted by all of this. But if he dies by suicide, his back pain and all these other things aren't going to matter. So we need to it's easy to get lost in the weeds when it comes to medical issues. But a lot of these things are, again, if we can improve the mental health, I'm willing to bet the back pain gets better. I'm willing to bet the blood pressure gets better. There's a lot of things. It's kind of like in the school setting, we talk about improving kids' behavioral health will improve their academic performance. Improving somebody's behavioral health will also, their mental health will also increase their physical performance.
That body and spirit connection that we're
Yeah.
talking about nowadays.
Yeah, we're finally connecting the dots, realizing that, again, same thing with my doctor, tumor. So I've been stressed out. All right, so when you connect the risk assessment, if any of the warning signs are present, if any of the risk factors are present, a lot of places now, like for pediatrics, there was a rule that came out that as of 12 years old, they're going to be starting to screen for depression, PHQ-9. So in the pediatric setting, you might say, okay, if they're flagged with PHQ-9, we're going to, why they chose 12 and 11. 9 they choose 11 instead of 10, you know. A lot of these things are, you know, kind of ambivalent at some point. Obviously, the more insights, more risk factors to the risk, but really truly what I would say is when does a risk assessment need to be done? Whenever you think a risk assessment needs to be done. Any part of your instincts, any part of your being says, you know what, this person might be at risk for suicide, even if none of this is present. And somebody should be talking to that individual about suicide. Somebody should make time in their day to say, yeah, we're going to need some extra time with this patient. Let's sit down and let's do a risk assessment. So key components of a risk assessment, assessing the risk factors. What's going on in this individual's life? Let's look at their situation, their circumstances. We need to ask about their suicide thoughts and their plan. We're going to give you some examples of that in a moment. We also want to look at the protective factors. You know, again, I was 2 people, the same risk factors, one person attempts and one person doesn't. And I'll just be honest with you, as great as risk assessment tools have become, they're getting better, the ability for us to predict who will die by suicide and who will not has changed in the past 50 years. It is the hardest thing to guess who is actually going to go through with intent and who would not. Especially when I do a little one with you. You will have a kid who comes from an abusive family with no sense of support, drug issues, mental health issues, failing out of school. You would say this kid is at high risk for suicide. You have a kid on the other end of the spectrum, supportive family, strong academic, and they're the ones making an attempt because they get beyond the test. And so there's not really any other way to address suicidality unless we're asking about suicidality and comfortable in that conversation. The scariest part is applying clinical judgment. Somebody's going to make a decision about what's going to happen to this individual. So we talked about these 2 tools earlier. PHQ2 and PHQ9 are often recommended. I want to go into depth about the quantity of suicide severity rating scale in the next session. And then looking at the patient's history, we're moving a lot to electronic records now, looking at do we have a flagging system, what other opportunities, and then again, interviewing the patient, having a conversation. So I'm going to go more in depth about discriminatory voice in the next session. But with that, just what are some of the ways that you've started the conversation in the past, or some of the ways that you've heard you should, or what are some of the ways that you found to be effective to start the conversation?
Well, for me, I so we ask for everything. If there's any mental health issues, depression, suicidal thoughts, or, suicide. But it's just starting to do that. I use those 4 questions and go on from there. Because
So what does the actual question sound like? Sorry to put you on the spot, but what is the actual question? Say I'm your patient, what does the actual question sound like to me? Because if you said, have you had any mental health issues, suicide thoughts, I'd be like, oh no.
depression, feeling like yourself, putting others, or maybe had depression in the past, or mostly because I've been in a course, that they will say, maybe, or I've been, I've had mental health issues, anxiety, and that's what the big one is.
Sure. All right, anybody else? What's that question, Lisa?
No, I'm really kind of just up front, and because I feel like I'm responsible for you at that time, I just ask, have you ever thought about killing yourself? Have you ever thought about committing suicide? And I think it does, there's a shock factor there for some people, like, whoa, you ask, but that's the only way you're really gonna get the true answer. I just ask, have you ever thought about killing yourself? And if you have, what's your plan? I just ask those questions.
That's excellent.
It's interesting because in my head, I'm thinking, because I work for a hospital, and it depends on the setting, but if I'm having a consult with a new mom, and I've already seen this long history of depression, anxiety, I'm already thinking, okay, how am I going to address it without shutting her down? One of my first approaches when I would go there, I want you to know that I already know something about her. So hi, I'm a social worker, I feel professionalism, and just say, just kind of say, sometimes they minimize it, sometimes they start crying. I mean, again, body language plays a role in your assessment of how they, are they feeling comfortable, and are they being defensive, and that triggers, that kind of sets up my stage to, okay, how am I going to approach this question, and because I know I have to ask. So you were depressed, tell me what kind of things did you do to cope with that?
Yeah.
How did you talk to people? And I will ask the question. That moment on your first day with your depression, did you try to cope yourself? Because I'm thinking of what you're saying, but I don't think, I've very few times that I've said very directly. Have you tried suicide? Or have you, tried to kill yourself? I think the way that I phrased it, and probably my own comfort level is, have you tried to hurt yourself? And they say, yeah, tell me about that, and then they say, I've cut myself, and then it kind of gives me space, have you ever tried to kill yourself? But it depends on the situation.
Well, it's all going to be situational, and it's also on some level cultural. Some cultures don't even have a word for suicide, and you do have to be careful, and I have to be very careful about this because I'm a middle class straight white male, so I have to be careful when I'm talking about culture. I do think we have to respect culture. I think we need to stop using culture as an excuse not to do our job. It may not come out perfectly, it may not come out, but I have to make sure you're safe. And being direct, being blunt, because pain is universal. Pain is experienced by every culture in different ways, but that feeling of pain is universal. And so I think, yes, be respectful of cultures and such, be respectful of the situation. There's a couple things that you all I want to comment on. One is you said time. They said, that was a long time ago. I was working with this kid who had told me that he'd been thinking about suicide for years. And so I asked him one time, and so we were talking, and said, so when was the last time you actually thought about suicide? And he's like, oh man, that was a long time ago. And I said, when was the actual last day that you had that thought that I think I want to kill myself? And he sat there for a second, and he said, I think it was last Monday. He said, and I wanted to reach across and strangle the kid, because I was like, how dare you lie to me? You said it was a long time, and then I realized, this kid told me he thought about suicide every day for 2 years, and he's had 10 days of free of suicide thoughts. That is an eternity for him. In my mind, that's only 10 days. We're going to still be getting you some follow-up, some response. So be very specific when asking. When people say, oh, it's been a long time, because again, a couple weeks can feel like an eternity. A couple other things, so we're going to get into this in greater detail when we talk about it. The question of hurting yourself. One of the things I train my cops, doctors, everybody on, you gotta get away from the question of, are you thinking about hurting yourself? Because if someone who's suicidal, if they're getting to a place because they are trying to get rid of the pain, they oftentimes will not see suicide as hurting themselves. They see suicide as relief of their pain. Also, let's say the person you're talking to has had a history of self-harm, their self-harming is no longer effective, so they're not thinking about self-harming anymore, but they are having thoughts of suicide. And you ask them, are you thinking about hurting yourself? They can honestly answer you, no, I'm not thinking about hurting myself. Thinking that you're asking about self-harm, and you never asked that question. You thought you were asking about suicide. They heard you asking about self-harm, so we want to be very careful.
Yeah, our very first question in the risk assessment is very specific. Are you thinking of killing yourself?
Yeah.
That's the wording in the super.
Yeah.
And then for us, it's really figuring out what is right now.
Yeah, we're going to break that down in really good detail when we get to the Columbia Street tool. Yeah. The other thing, this isn't to call anybody out, but from a messaging standpoint, in the suicide prevention community, this isn't research, this doesn't prevent suicide, it just helps reduce stigma. We're trying to get rid of the term commit suicide. The reason why is, let's do this, let's do a word association game. What other things do we commit? We commit, this is the interactive part. We commit crimes, we commit adultery, treason, sin, murder, negative things. Now we also commit to our friendships, our marriages, our relationships, our work. That word committed brings with it a ton of negative connotation. A lot of people are shocked to find out it used to be illegal to attempt suicide. A lot of faith institutions are starting to change the way they frame suicide, realizing that if I go to my faith leader for any of my counseling needs, I hesitate with what I'm thinking about as a sin. I was raised Roman Catholic. You could commit 5 sins just by thinking about sin before you even get to the sin itself. The Jesuit Church is actually declassifying suicide as a mortal sin, realizing that we need to eliminate, if we're trying to prevent people from suicide, we need them to come, we need to get rid of barriers to people coming to us. So, just to try to change the way we frame suicide, rather than using the term committing some people simply use the term died by suicide. Another term that we're trying to clarify is you'll hear people say successful attempt versus an unsuccessful attempt. If you succeed, you die. If you fail, you live. This doesn't make sense. So it's either a death by suicide or it's attempted suicide. It's a successful suicide, it's a death by suicide. An unsuccessful attempt is an attempted suicide. The more we can stick to those two terms, the more we can remove the bias and the stigma and all the other issues that come with those terms. So it's something to throw out. But great job with the conversation. So there's a lot of different ways that people have, can lead into this. One of the things that I do, especially with my law enforcement officers and my EMTs, I'll share this analogy with you. I hope I don't offend anybody, but let's say that you're in a bar or a barbecue or whatever, and you see an attractive person sitting over at the table. You're not just going to walk up to that person and say, "Hey, can I have your number?" You're going to walk up, and you're single and you're allowed to do this. This is all fun. You walk up to the person and you introduce yourself. Hi, I'm Sandy. I sit with you. Oh, that's great. Hey, you look fantastic. What brought you here? Oh, okay. You like that guy? I love that too. Hey, so what kind of things are you into? And you build up trust and you build up rapport, and then you ask them a very personal question. So although it doesn't need to be direct with the question, sometimes, especially when having a connection with this person, it's okay to take a little bit of time and build up some trust and build up some rapport. So to do that, sometimes we might be saying things like, what? It sounds like you're going through a lot. People that are going through that, like you're being informed about every aspect, every part of your life is bringing you pain right now. I know people that when they've been experiencing that type of pain, they lose hope, they lost hope. Okay, well, is that hope ever made you think about going life? Is that hope ever made you think about wanting to be dead? So, you may start off with asking about questions, about pain, about not wanting to be alive. The questions that it sounds like everybody was getting to are these ones right here. Are you thinking about suicide? Are you thinking about killing yourself? Now, I personally don't use the term killing yourself just because many of the people that I work with that are suicidal, the term kill doesn't jive with them because it sounds so aggressive and so aggravated. So I stick with suicide. That's just me. Either one is effective. Either one of these questions, it is very clear what you're asking about. So you won't be specific. From there, and again, we're going to go into greater detail when we go into the Columbia screening tool. But how long have you been having these thoughts? And the way that I translate these for people, because you're not going to remember each of these questions. If I was your 5-year-old nephew, and I came to you, and I said, Auntie, Uncle, I have to tell you, what kind of questions would you ask me about pain in my son? How long have you been experiencing this pain? What else? Describe the pain. Tell me about the pain. What does it feel like? What? Scale of 1 to 10. How bad is the pain? It's at a 7 now. It's at a 10 yesterday. What changed between yesterday and today? So are there things that you can do to reduce this pain? And when we conceptualize it as pain, it gives us a lot better direction on where to go with the questions, because now we're understanding what's driving the thoughts of suicide, we're understanding the pain. So, what are these thoughts the worst? They're the worst than after you've had a couple of drinks and you get on Facebook and you see your ex and all these pictures of how happy they are and their new kids or whatever. Well, when that happens, what does that feel like? It feels like you can't breathe, it feels like the world's just going to end. Is there anything that you can do in that moment to stop and to help reduce that pain? Can you go for a walk? Can you exercise? Can you play music? Is there something you can call? What can you do to deal with these? Okay, with these, how often do you have these thoughts? How often does this pain overwhelm you? Oh, this is happening 20 times a day. Okay, that's really severe. How long do you have these thoughts? How long do they last? Is it just something that's fleeting? It's almost like It's the inverse of, for those of you who have lost somebody close to you, the grief process is it's almost like those first few days, first few weeks, you can't think about anything else, and those thoughts and that pain is just so overwhelming, and over time, the thoughts get less frequent, they get less painful, they get less, in your face, and it's the inverse of suicide, where they start to expand and become more frequent, and they become more lasting, they become more deep, and so we want to get a better sense of where is this person at. When we talk about planning, a lot of times people in the medical profession, I've seen them skip the plan because they say, well, I don't want to ask them about a plan because what if they don't have a plan? And their doctor just asks them if they have a plan. And what they think when they don't say, I should probably have a plan because the doctor said I should have a plan. But I'm going to be a lot more concerned about somebody who says, this is how I'm going to do it, this is where I'm going to do it, than I would be about somebody who says, you know what, I haven't thought about it. Again, this will make more sense when we get to the Columbia screening tool and the progression that goes with it. But a lot of times, we can, even if the answer is no to this, we'll get a yes to this question. Have you got anything you can carry an after plan? That could be right now or well. That could be getting your favorite suit dry cleaned so that it's sitting in front of your closet. Not something that is anything related to means and methods, but a preparatory step for me not being around anymore. And that may not mean that they're going to make an active suicide attempt. Maybe they're going to drink and keep drinking and driving until they get into a car accident. Maybe they're going to keep using drugs or alcohol until they die. They're starting to make plans to prepare for their death. And so we want to be especially concerned about behaviors, and especially the time frame on behaviors. Was this 6 months ago? Was this 2 days ago? And then finding out what are those protective factors. What stops you? Like that individual I spoke to earlier with the Marine. What stops you? My doctor. Okay, that's your doctor. Now, when we talk to people about what stops them, a lot of times, as we're looking for protective factors, as we're looking for hope, it is a feeling of landmines. And we will ask people, well, how about your family? Everybody in my family died in a car accident last month. Well, how about any pets? Do you have any pets? My cat died in a car accident too. Well, what about your favorite song? My favorite musician just died. And you're like, oh my God, and you keep like dodging around. But that's okay. You're gonna make mistakes. You're gonna step on things that you didn't intend to. Let them process it, let them figure it out. And a lot of times, honestly, people will figure it out on their own. If you just keep listening, maybe we'll start, again, that instinct for self-preservation will rise up. I do a lot of work with emergency dispatchers. And they say one of the best things that they do is they just listen. And a lot of people don't know this, but a suicidal crisis typically only lasts for 30 to 90 minutes. So somebody could be suicidal for 2 years. In that 2 years, there's probably only a handful of times where they're actually capable of suicide. And those periods of time typically only last about 30 to 90 minutes. So one of the things to remember, well, 2 things to remember. If you're ever talking to somebody about suicide, realize that at least 1% of them is not sure yet. If 100% of them didn't want to be alive, they wouldn't be alive. We wouldn't be having this conversation. So there's at least part of them that's not sure that's a bit. The other part is that time is on your side. Just by every second you spend in the room or on the phone or with that individual, they are becoming less at risk for suicide. If you can just hold on and wait it out, that doesn't mean their suicide risk is going to go away. That means that their imminent suicide risk is going to alleviate. You're going to be able to look at some other options and work with a person that's got a lot more perspective on it. But we need to look at the protective factor. So, a sense of responsibility. Sometimes people say, well, shoot, I never thought about it. Who's going to feed my cat? Okay, let's start there. Let's figure out, let's focus on that. Their belongings, their problem solving skills. A lot of what we're looking at now as far as upstream suicide prevention is embracing coping skills and helping behaviors earlier in life. There's a program called the Good Behavior Game that they did in a second grade classroom. They followed the kids who did that program over a 20-year period against a control group. And what they found is that 20 years later, the kids who participated in that program in second grade that had nothing to do with suicide prevention had 50% less rates of suicide attempts, 50% less rates, lower rates of substance abuse. And so a lot of times it comes back to younger and younger babies. And we're also starting to pay more and more attention to ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences. When I talked about that middle-aged group of men, a lot of times when I speak to them on a one-on-one setting, they have some significant trauma very early in their lives that doesn't get addressed. But when they go to the therapist at 50 years old, they go in and they say, I just lost my job and the marriage is failing and I need help. And so they focus on the job failing and the marriage failing. And a lot of mental health professionals don't rewind the tape far enough to back when they were 10 years old and they were sexually abused, to say, oh, well, your marriage failed because you never dealt with the sexual trauma that you experienced at 10 years old. And so you need to be looking back. Strong therapeutic relationship. One of the things I always tell people is it's easier to go back to therapy than it is to start therapy. I have a therapist, I kind of see him in waves, his life goes and ebbs. It's a lot easier for me to call him up and say, hey, can you fit me in next week than it is for me to get on my insurance website, play roulette, whoever's listed there, or whatever. And then faith. For a long time, mental health and faith communities were butting heads, and we're finally starting to embrace each other and realize that faith and mental health can go hand in hand, and that faith can be a big indicator of protecting us. All right, so once we've looked at those things, and again, we're going to go through that. This is where the scary part, right? We need to make the clinical judgment. One thing that I always recommend is that the clinical judgment should never be done in isolation. It should always, as much as possible, be done in a team. Even if it's just one person in the room, that ability to go to somebody and say, hey, look, this is what's going on. I know what protocols say that I should put them in the red bucket and press the red button, but I feel like this person's got a good support network. I feel like they're working with me. Just having that little bit of back and forth. But a lot of times we see low risk, moderate risk, high risk. And again, we're going to go in more detail with this later. One of the things that I don't like about the models that we have out there is I really don't like the term low risk. If someone has expressed thoughts of suicide, they are not at low risk for suicide. Somebody who is not having thoughts of suicide is at low risk for suicide. So I like some places use the term passive risk, which means they're not actively taking steps towards suicide. For me, that keeps people on their toes a little bit more. Low risk, I feel like people can build complacency. Yeah, we reassessed them there at low risk until they don't get followed up, they don't get flagged, they don't get responded to quite as much. So that's just somebody's having thoughts. Moderate is somebody, they have some thoughts, maybe a little bit of a plan, but not really intent. And then high risk is a plan with intent, with behaviors. And again, on that flash chart you have, you can print this sheet out as kind of just a quick mental map on where to go. Again, we're going to spend a lot of time on safety planning and support, so I don't want to spend too much right now, but what I will say is that the way that I describe a safety plan is that it's teaching people to swim against the rip current rather than waiting and hoping that somebody throws a life preserver when they get caught. And so it's about teaching people. But one of the things that I work with dispatchers and crisis line staff is let's do a safety plan over the phone. And while the dispatcher is waiting for law enforcement to respond, let's stop. You're going to have 45 minutes probably in that way, because this is going to be a low priority call, as sad as that is. So let's not just talk about suicide all the time. Let's talk about hope. Let's switch the conversation to, hey, I know this feels bad right now. Let's talk about what we can do next time so that you don't feel this bad. And so safety planning is about teaching people to recognize their own signs, their own coping skills, their own distractions, their own crisis support network, and then helping them look at what are those crisis resources that they can access. Just quick show of hands, anybody ever heard of the My3 mobile app? Yeah, what is the My3 mobile app?
It's a really good app that you can download, obviously, and then it'll kind of show you the risk factors, what your support systems are, what you do in case you're having these thoughts. So I always recommend it to kids, like in our high school setting, suicide.
So when the science team, my team actually created it. We gave it to the National Lifeline for sustainability. But basically what it is it's a digital copy of a safety plan. What you have here is when you download the app, it's for free on iPhone or Android. It's not a replacement. It's not just something that you say, hey kid, you're thinking about suicide, download this app and you'll figure it out. Once you've sat down with them and you do a safety plan, you have them download it, and then you can customize it so the person can put it in there. They take everything that was in that written paper safety plan, and now they have a digital copy. Because we're not going to keep that piece of paper with us all the time. We're going to keep our phones with us all the time. What's really cool too is you can pull your bug tags. And so these symbols here, you can actually add your friend's picture. And with one push of a button, you can get connected to that individual. So when you talk to that person and say, hey, will you be part of my safety network, they can be there. One thing just to note is when you download the app for that feature, that function to work, it's going to ask you, hey, My3 would like access to your contacts. And every time an app asks me that, we say, no, screw you, you know, contact. This is one of those where you have to let it to your contacts for that. The rest of the functions can work with kids, or not kid, patient, individuals at all concerned about privacy. They don't have to allow that. They can obviously still go into their phone and press it. and they can still customize everything else. But just one of the features about it that I wanted you to be aware of. All right, from there, one of the things that doesn't happen enough is follow-up visits. How are we finding this person? How are we going to follow up and reach out to this individual? Communities around the state are finally embracing follow-up visits after hospitalizations or follow-up contact. And so they're engaging with crisis hotlines to make a phone call to an individual. There's a lot of studies that show whether it's a phone call or even a postcard, one after someone is hospitalized for suicide risk, a simple postcard reduces suicide risk by a significant amount. So I'll follow up and say, hey, you worked with some number that came in, checked out, referrals and more hands off. Thinking about the stuff that, again, go back, this is a primary care training, so thinking about the primary care setting, who are we going to call? Who's going to be the person to make the phone call? Who's going to be the person that calls out? Who's going to be the person that contacts the family? We don't do a lot of this stuff ahead of time until it's in our face. That crisis support, and of course, documentation. You want to document every reason for everything you did, and also have some other opinions about it. So again, we talked about this earlier, so I won't spend too much time. Who's going to provide the assessments? You know, a lot of times I work in a place and they say, oh, that person does the assessment. I'll ask them, well, what assessment tool do you use? And they say, I don't know, we just use the one we have. Why do you use that assessment tool? I don't know, because it's the one we have when I got here. Who created it? I don't know, it's just there. Have you ever been trained how to do an assessment? No, I just figured it out on the job. We need to be asking a little bit more critical questions. And we also have to be willing to be honest and say, you know what, no, I've never had training on assessment. I do it all the time, but I've never had training. I would love to get training on assessment. Some resources in case you're not familiar with them: the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, suicideispreventable.org. This is a really cool website, mdsd.org. It's a San Diego-based website. But one of the main benefits of it is you can actually, through that website, contact an organization. A lot of people in California will come across borders with medications that we don't know how to translate. So you can contact the MDHealth.org and say, hey, this person came here with this medication. I don't know what our equivalent is. Can you help me with the dosages and the medications and stuff? So that's really beneficial as well. There's a number of other resources out there. Again, having counseling on access to lethal means, just because you're not comfortable talking to somebody about lethal means doesn't mean you shouldn't be talking about lethal means, or if you're not comfortable, get that support. If there's one thing that we can tell people about the resources, the crisis resources that are out here, most important thing that we're missing. More people know than ever that the crisis line exists. Most people have a lot of misconceptions. They think, A, that you should wait until you're thinking about suicide to call, which is absolutely untrue. Trevor Lifeline is the same way. Call us as soon as those thoughts come. Similarly, every crisis hotline is not just there for the individual in crisis or in distress. They are there to support the helpers of the individual in distress. So if you're about to have a conversation, you just got done having a conversation, you're not sure where to go, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, you're not sure what places are open, contacting these crisis lines, they can give you resources and access. Again, not even if it's suicidal. A friend of mine, her mother lived here a few months ago from Germany. She speaks very little English, has a ton of anxiety and depression because of the move, and has had a previous history of suicide. She contacted our local San Diego crisis line within 30 minutes, was able to find a therapist who spoke German, specializes in immigration issues, and has training in suicide risk. So those are the types of connections that I think a lot of us don't know, but we can try to support through crisis lines. All right, with that, we just have a few more minutes, so I just wanted to open it up for questions. Here's my email addresses. You're going to have a ton of stuff today, so you're welcome to contact me anytime. You won't say anything about the evaluations.